Hanoi to serve as whole sex slave. But when she had a child by him, she took the bold step of asking that he married her so as to give the boy his paternity. This was what sealed her fate. She was killed after being raped repeatedly by Ho's underling, Tran Quoc Huan, then knocked dead with a blunt instrument hitting her head, then done away in a phony accident to give the appearance of an accidental death.
Có một chị nữ thanh niên người Nùng ở Cao Bằng tên là Nông Thị Xuân.
The story is like this. There was a young lady of Nung minority in Cao Bang named Ngong Thi Xuân. She was taken to Hanoi to serve uncle, so she took along with her a younger sister by the name of Ngong Thi Van. In Hanoi, they changed her family name from Ngon to Nguyen. After she gave birth to a boy by the name of Nguyen Tat Trung on Dyer Street, they then set up a phony accident in which she was killed on Nhat Tan Street. After she was dead, her sister Van, who fled to Cao Bang, was also done away with, so as to eliminate all eyewitnesses to this horrid story. Afterwards, it was the man who was Van's groom-to-be wrote a personal denunciatory letter to Nguyen Hu To, the chairman of the National Assembly, in which he retold everything as told him by Van. There was also a second letter written by a number of wounded veteran friends of Van's husband-to-be, confirming the same, and addressed to Nguyen Hu To and CC to Le Duan, Secretary General of the Communist Party of Vietnam, Pham Van Dong, the Premier, and Pham Hoon, the Deputy Premier at the time.
Và cái người kể cho tôi cái câu chuyện này là
The person who told me about this was Mr. Nguyen Van Thao, former Deputy Director of the Vietnam Public Security Office, an office established right after the Communists came to power in 1945. Mr. Tao told me that the person instrumental in bringing Miss Ngong Thi Xuân to Hanoi was Mr. Tran Dan Nhin, head of the General Logistics Department, who suggested that she would look after the old man. It is not quite right to call her the old man's wife, since they were never married. Later, we heard that Miss Xuân asked that she be made the old man's wife after she gave birth to a son. This was what caused her downfall, a tragic, horrific death. Nobody knows quite how she was killed. Was she strangled, or was she run over by a car? All we know is that her corpse apparently had been laid down on the road before the car hit her. Among the details of what happened, it was later revealed that in the car there was Ta Quan Chien, one of Ho's bodyguards, who was later made Director General of the Athletics Department. From this, one could deduce that the old man Ho must be perfectly aware of this crime. What is certain is that the old man had with Xuân a young boy. Some time ago, I wrote a very long article in which I said that one could not just leave the story of that boy hanging in the air like that. Nguyen Tat Jun was born in 1956, so he is now 52. He lived in an extremely frightful condition. He knows that he is the son of Ho Chi Minh, something which he only learned gradually, since right after his birth he was given to the Women's Association to be raised as an orphan, then later to General Chu Van Tan to take care of. When Chu Van Tan was expelled from the party, arrested, thrown in jail, and died therein, Nguyen Tat Jun was given to Vu Ki to raise as a foster child, which is why his name was changed to Vu Trung. This was after Ho Chi Minh died in 1969.
Another interesting fact is that we have this story, which was hidden for many years, that apparently Ho Chi Minh's wife, a young woman by the name of Nom Thi Xuân, was killed, was murdered in 1958. If Ho Chi Minh were really respected as a man of Duk, even within the Communist Party, nobody would dare to harm his wife or his relations.
In 1989, the Communist House of Cards in Eastern Europe, then in the Soviet Union, collapsed, spelling out the bankruptcy of Marxism-Leninism as a system of thought in the world. Though 4 countries still exist in the world that nominally call themselves communist, even here communism is put on the shelves to gather dust, as in China, and Confucianism, much vilified under the Great Cultural Revolution, is back and in fashion with a vengeance.
In Vietnam, the official ideology is described as a field of study that teachers don't want to teach and students don't want to learn. So, in order to retain a semblance of ideology, the government in Hanoi rushed to dust off some old Ho Chi Minh sayings and proclaim them as Ho Chi Minh thought, which they enshrined in the 1992 Vietnamese Constitution as the leading thought of the nation. The trouble is, does such a thing as Ho Chi Minh thought really exist?
Khi hiến pháp năm 1980 thì cái phe chủ nghĩa vẫn còn.
Years ago, that is in the 1980s, when the socialist bloc still existed in Eastern Europe, they talked all the time about Marxism-Leninism. After 1990, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Vietnamese Communist Party, on the one hand, tried its best to black out or distort the information coming from Eastern Europe. In their explanation, what happened was the doing of US imperialism, fostered by reactionary forces or through a peaceful evolutionary scheme, which led to the collapse. Otherwise, Marxism-Leninism was still an all-victorious ideology. Then they inscribed Ho Chi Minh thought in the Constitution, but in actuality, there is no such thing as Ho Chi Minh thought. For if you look at it, it's no more than a few pronouncements like the need for industry, fiscal conservatism, bureaucratic integrity, and uprightness, the need for putting the public's interest ahead of one's own, patriotism, the love of socialism, all meaningless slogans with no relation whatsoever to the realities of Vietnam.
Một loạt nước xã hội chủ nghĩa.
Simple. In 1989, a series of socialist countries in Eastern Europe collapsed. In 1991, the Soviet Union followed suit, which also brought domino-like collapse of Outer Mongolia. This proved that Marxism-Leninism was no longer a viable proposition, since everybody before then had considered the Soviet Union to be the last bastion of communism, considered the socialist bloc and socialist countries to be invincible, yet they had all collapsed like a house of cards. This proved that Marxism-Leninism was no longer a valid ideology. This is the exact opposite of what happened at the beginning of the 20th century, when Marxism-Leninism was held in much admiration, whereas now people turn their back on it. In order to survive, the Communist Party of Vietnam had to turn to another direction. But in 1951, when I attended the second progress of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, which transformed itself into the Vietnamese Workers' Party, it was suggested that next to Mao thought, one should also add the thought of Ho Chi Minh. Right away, and I heard it in my own ears, Ho Chi Minh brushed off the idea, saying that he had no thought of his own, that he only adhered to Marxism-Leninism, and that he was only an action man. Thus, to inscribe Ho Chi Minh thought into the Constitution was a necessity without which the CPV would not have a bearing of its own. With the disappearance of Marxism-Leninism, they were bound to put something in its place. It was like a boy that the Politburo in Hanoi had to cling on to, but in reality, it's no more than the